I found out my grandfather passed away through a Facebook post. Not a call, not a text. Just a distant cousin tagging someone in a blurry photo with the caption, "We'll miss you, Grandpa." I must have read it 5 times before it sank in. I stared at my phone like it had betrayed me, like maybe refreshing the page would make the words change. But they didn't. He was gone. And no one told me. I don't mean they forgot, I mean someone made the conscious decision to keep me in the dark. I called my dad right away. He didn't answer. I left a message trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, I just saw something on Facebook about Grandpa. Is he gone?" Nothing. I called again 2 hours later, straight to voicemail. That night I just sat on the couch in silence, holding the phone like it still might ring. But deep down I knew. If they'd wanted me there, I would have known. My grandfather and I used to be close. He was the kind of man who didn't say much, but when he did, it mattered. He used to keep butterscotch candies in his coat pocket just for me. Every summer, when I was little, he'd take me fishing at the lake near his cabin in Oregon. I was the only granddaughter who learned how to clean a fish without flinching, and he loved that. But everything changed after Mom died. Dad remarried less than a year later. Suddenly our house wasn't mine anymore. My stepmother and her 2 daughters moved in, and it was like I became the extra chair no one needed. They had inside jokes, family dinners without me, and slowly, even holidays stopped feeling like home. I guess when Mom passed, I lost more than just her. I lost my place in the family. Grandpa still sent me birthday cards those first few years. Handwritten, always with a crisp $20 bill inside and a short note like, "Still proud of you, kiddo." But even those stopped coming 2 years ago. At the time, I figured he just got tired or forgot. He was in his 80s after all. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe someone made sure I didn't hear from him. Maybe the distance wasn't entirely his choice. The thought made my stomach twist. As I sat there that night, the image of that blurry Facebook post burned in my brain. Everyone standing around in black. Everyone except me. I wasn't invited to say goodbye. And it wasn't an accident. Looking back, I guess the signs were always there. It started small. Family dinners where no one mentioned me. Group photos I wasn't in. Birthday parties that got lost in the mail. I'd find out through social media or not at all. It was like I had faded out of their reality, one forgotten invitation at a time. After Dad remarried, everything shifted. He was so eager to start fresh with his new wife Nancy and her 2 teenage daughters Erica and Jessica. I was 17 then, old enough to notice how the air changed the moment they moved in. Nancy would smile at me, but it never reached her eyes. She was all about appearances. Organized kitchen cabinets, matching Christmas pajamas, smiling family photos on the fridge. But I was never in those pictures. Dad tried, at first. I think he meant well, but he was so wrapped up in making his new family work, he didn't see how left out I felt. Every time I tried to talk to him, it somehow turned into me being too sensitive or holding on to the past. Then came college. I applied for a scholarship and left for Portland. At first I thought the distance would help. I figured maybe if I gave them space, they'd come around. But they didn't. Calls became texts, texts became silence. When I came home for Thanksgiving one year, Nancy told me, smiling of course, that they'd already made dinner plans with just the core group. I wasn't sure what that meant until I saw the pictures later. The core group was everyone but me. Still, I held on to Grandpa. Even when everything else felt cold, he was warm. He didn't take sides. When I visited, he'd make us both a cup of tea and listen, without judging. Sometimes he wouldn't say much, just a nod or a small, But somehow that made me feel more heard than any long speech. He didn't say he loved me. He showed it. Like the time he drove 3 hours just to drop off my favorite books when I moved into my dorm. Or when he mailed me clippings from the local paper with notes in the margins. "This reminded me of you." Those moments kept me grounded. They reminded me that I still had family, that I still mattered. But somewhere along the way, that thread got cut. I don't know when it happened, maybe when Grandpa's health started to decline and he moved into assisted living. Maybe Nancy took over everything then, his mail, his phone, his access to the outside world. All I know is, I never got a goodbye. Not even the chance. And now I'm sitting here wondering how I became a ghost in my own family story. The last time I saw Grandpa was nearly a year before he passed. It wasn't a long visit, just a quiet Sunday afternoon. I'd driven 3 hours from Portland to see him at the assisted living center in Salem. I had to call twice and pretend I needed to drop off something important, just to get the staff to let me know when he'd be free. It felt like I was sneaking into my own family. When I walked in, he was sitting by the window, sunlight pouring over his thin white hair. He looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but when he saw me, his whole face lit up. "Emily," he said, like he hadn't said that name out loud in months. I brought him his favorite lemon cookies and a little photo album I'd made of our fishing trips. We sat in silence flipping through the pages, and every so often he'd laugh or point at something and say, "You were always braver than the boys." That made me smile. But beneath that joy I sensed something else, like he was watching his time run out and didn't want to waste a second. At one point he looked at me and said, "Don't let them make you small." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He didn't explain. He just shook his head and smiled in that knowing way of his, like he saw something I didn't. We only had about an hour together. The staff came in and told me visiting hours were over and that someone else had called ahead to limit how long I stayed. I remember feeling something twist in my gut when they said that. Someone else. I asked Grandpa if he wanted me to come back soon. He squeezed my hand and said, "I hope you will. But if not, you remember I loved you, right?" I nodded, but I was fighting back tears. I didn't want to believe it might be the last time. That night, I texted Dad and Nancy to let them know I'd visited Grandpa. I figured maybe it would open a door, lead to a conversation. I got no reply. Weeks went by, then months. I wanted to visit again, but no one would give me a clear answer on how to reach him. The staff said I wasn't on the list anymore. When I asked who changed it, they wouldn't say. I tried calling the family, no one picked up. Now I realized someone was slowly cutting me out, and they succeeded. I just didn't know it at the time. The funeral had already happened by the time I even knew he was gone. I found out on a Tuesday, the service was on Sunday. I saw it in a photo someone had posted. An outdoor gathering, folding chairs, people dressed in black. There was a white flower arrangement shaped like a cross and a big photo of Grandpa at the front. My cousin Kelsey stood near the podium, speaking. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. And I wasn't there. No one had told me. No text, no call, no invitation, not even a generic announcement. They had buried my grandfather without me. At first I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone thought someone else would reach out. Maybe there had been an oversight. But then I saw the guest list in the caption. They had tagged everyone who attended. Dad, Nancy, Erica, Jessica. My aunts, my cousins. Even people I hadn't seen since childhood. Literally everyone. Except me. I tried calling Dad again. I didn't even get voicemail this time. Just a message saying the number was no longer in service. I sat on my bedroom floor for a long time, just staring at nothing. I felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just that I missed the funeral. It was that someone had made sure I wasn't part of it. That I didn't belong there. That realization hit harder than I expected. Grandpa was the only person in that family who made me feel seen. Even when I was pushed to the side, he made space for me. And now, they had erased my connection to him too. I scrolled through every photo I could find. Kelsey hugging Nancy, Erica reading a poem, Jessica holding a white rose. It looked like the perfect grief-filled goodbye. So carefully staged, so polished. It made me sick. They didn't just exclude me, they rewrote the story. They made it look like he had one perfect, united family. One I was never part of. I wanted to scream. To drive to their house, to confront them, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. They'd say I was being dramatic, they'd paint me as the bitter outsider, the estranged granddaughter who didn't show up. Because that's easier than admitting they locked the door before I could even knock. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to be allowed to grieve, to stand by his grave and whisper goodbye. But even that, they took from me. So I sat there, phone in hand, and promised myself something. They may have taken my invitation, but they wouldn't take my voice. I would say goodbye to Grandpa on my terms. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Grandpa, his voice, his hands, the way he'd tap his fingers on the table when he was deep in thought. I couldn't get the image of the funeral out of my head. The chairs, the flowers, the faces, all of them pretending like I never existed. By sunrise, I knew I had to do something. Not to lash out, not to make a scene, but to remind them, and maybe even myself, that I had every right to mourn him. That my love for him didn't need their permission. So I called a local florist in Salem. I remembered Grandpa always liked lilies, so I ordered a huge bouquet of white lilies and hydrangeas. Then I asked the florist if she could include a personal message. She said yes. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote the note by hand. It took me 3 tries to get it right, not because I didn't know what to say, but because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The final version read, "To the man who taught me strength without words, who saw me when no one else did, who made me feel like I belonged in a family that never made space for me. I miss you, I love you. I will always remember the way you made me feel seen. You deserved better. Love, Emily." I asked the florist to deliver the flowers to his gravesite the next morning. She promised she would. She didn't ask questions, just said, "I'll make sure it's beautiful." For the first time in days, I exhaled. I couldn't be at the funeral. I couldn't speak at the podium or hug the people who were supposed to be my family. But I could do this. I could honor him in a way that was honest, that wasn't filtered through anyone else's version of what our relationship was. And, in a way, it felt more real than anything they did. Later that week, I heard through a mutual friend that the flowers had arrived, and that they were hard to miss. Big, bold, right in front of the headstone. And the note? It made people uncomfortable. There was talk, whispering. Some were upset. A few said I had crossed a line. But others, they said it made them cry. I wasn't trying to cause a scene. I just wanted my truth to sit next to his memory, to say, I was here. I mattered to him, because I did. And they couldn't rewrite that. 3 days after the flowers were delivered, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'd been avoiding calls, social media, even email, afraid of what people might say, but something told me to pick up. "Emily?" a soft voice asked. "It's Aunt Linda." I hadn't heard from Aunt Linda in years. She was my mom's sister, one of the few people who ever treated me like family after Mom died. But after Dad remarried, she slowly drifted out of the picture. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was survival. She hesitated, then said, "I saw the flowers." My stomach clenched. "I'm sorry if it upset anyone." "No," she said quickly, voice trembling. "It didn't upset me, it broke me. And it needed to." We were quiet for a few seconds. "I didn't know they kept you away," she continued. "I should have asked. I should have checked in. But I thought if I stayed quiet, things would settle down." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. "They never wanted me there, Linda." "I know," she whispered, "and I should have fought harder for you." I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long feeling invisible that hearing someone acknowledge it almost hurt more than the silence. Linda told me what I suspected. Nancy had taken full control of the arrangements. Everything went through her. Guest list, logistics, who got updates, who didn't. "Your dad didn't fight it," she said. "I think he gave up a long time ago." I bit my lip. I wasn't ready to unpack that. "She made it look like you and Grandpa were never close, like you'd drifted away years ago." I laughed bitterly. They didn't need to rewrite the story, they just had to erase the parts that didn't fit. Linda let out a sigh. "I'm sorry, Emily, I really am. And thank you for reminding me of who he really was. That note, it wasn't just for him. It was for all of us who forgot." That hit me hard. All this time, I thought the note was mine alone. But it turned out, even in death, Grandpa was still connecting people, still making someone feel seen. After we hung up, I sat by the window, watching the sun go down. I still felt grief, still felt that ache in my chest. But it wasn't so sharp anymore. Because someone saw me, someone remembered me. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. A week later, I got an email from the assisted living center where Grandpa had stayed. It was short, just a scanned copy of a form I'd apparently signed months earlier, giving Nancy access to Grandpa's records and limiting my own visits. Except, I never signed that form. My stomach dropped. I called the facility immediately, and after a few transfers, I got someone from administration on the line. I asked how they got my signature. The woman paused, then said, "We received it through the family. We were told you couldn't be reached, so they provided it on your behalf." My voice shook. "But it's not my signature." Another long pause. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'll escalate this. This isn't supposed to happen." That night, I stared at the email for a long time. The signature was messy, but it wasn't mine. I recognized my own writing. I had practiced it since I was 12. This was different. A forgery. Someone had cut me off on purpose. And now I had proof. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was real. Someone, most likely Nancy, had fabricated a signature to control access to Grandpa. She didn't want me around, and she made sure of it. Legally, quietly, completely. I felt sick, but I also felt something else. Something sharper. Like the edge of clarity. They didn't just want to forget me. They wanted to erase me. I called Aunt Linda again and told her what I found. She didn't sound surprised. "I always wondered how she got so much control so fast," she said. "But no one wanted to stir the pot." Of course they didn't. No one wanted conflict. No one wanted to question Nancy, the woman who saved Dad from his grief. She was charming in that suburban PTA mom kind of way. Organized, involved, always with a smile. But now, I saw her for what she was. Controlling, calculating, and unafraid to rewrite the narrative if it kept her world neat. I couldn't stop thinking about the last time I saw Grandpa. That strange look in his eyes when he said, "Don't let them make you small." Now I knew he was trying to warn me, and I hadn't understood it until now. The next morning I called a lawyer. I didn't want revenge, but I did want the truth recorded. Somewhere, I wanted something in writing that said, "This happened." Even if no one ever read it, I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was fighting for the part of me that they tried to bury with him. A month later, I went back to Salem. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need permission or an audience. I just got in my car, picked up a thermos of hot tea, Grandpa's favorite, and drove 3 hours in silence. It was the kind of gray, quiet day he used to love. A little chilly, a little still. I brought a folding chair, a second cup, and that same photo album I made for him last year. I walked to his gravesite slowly, carrying everything like it was sacred. There were still traces of the flowers I'd sent, some petals dried and brown now, but the message still there, tucked gently under a stone. I sat down beside him and poured tea into both cups. "Hi, Grandpa," I whispered. "It's just us now." For the next hour, I talked. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. I told him about the lies, the signature, the silence, about Aunt Linda and the phone call that had changed something deep inside me. I told him I missed him, that I wasn't okay, but I was healing. Slowly. I read him a few pages from the photo album, laughed at our crooked fishing selfies, cried when I found the one where he kissed the top of my head on my high school graduation day. He was my person, and they tried to erase that, but they couldn't. I placed the photo album beside the headstone, wrapped in plastic so the rain wouldn't ruin it. Then I stood up, took one deep breath, and said, "I forgive you, Dad, but I won't forget. And I'm done waiting to be loved by people who don't know how." That part wasn't for Grandpa, that was for me. Before I left, I poured the second cup of tea onto the grass. "For you," I said. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need a speech or a scene. I just needed this moment. A quiet goodbye, surrounded by the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I didn't feel broken. I felt light, like something heavy had finally been lifted. Not gone completely, but no longer crushing me. Grief doesn't always come with closure, but sometimes it comes with truth. And that's enough.